Hey Sunnyside, Pastor Jesse here, and welcome to this week's episode of Bible Bites. Just to recap, last week we looked at Ephesians 1 verse 3, looking at those blessings that we have received from God. And today we're going to jump back in, pick up at verse 4 and go to verse 6 today. So let's go ahead and read our text for today. It says, "Even as he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we should be holy and blameless before him in love. He predestined us for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ, according to the purpose of his will, to the praise of his glorious grace, with which he has blessed us in the beloved." Right away in this passage, we learn something really cool, that God chose us in him. He didn't have to, but he chose each one of us. But for what purpose? Verse 5 says that it is for adoption to himself as sons through Jesus Christ. The reason that this is so important is this idea of God choosing us comes way before we ever chose God. Ever before we made that conscious decision to give our lives to him, he already chose us and adopted us as his children. Another cool thing to note here is the language that Paul uses in this text. When he says in verse 5 that we are chosen for adoption to himself as sons. He doesn't say daughters, he doesn't say children, it's sons. Now before you start freaking out as a woman that you feel that this passage isn't for you, I want to remind you it is. See, the reason he used the words adopted as sons is because of, go back to Old Testament times. In the Old Testament, it was the firstborn son who would inherit everything. The land, the buildings, the wealth, the cattle, everything would be left to the oldest son. Even if the oldest child of the family was a daughter, it wouldn't matter. It would go to that firstborn son. That is why Paul uses this wording to create this imagery. He's trying to convey that regardless of if you are male or female, you have been adopted into God's family as a son. Not just any son, but as the firstborn son in his family. That we will all get to share in the benefits of being that firstborn. That we are then all heirs to the Father's kingdom. That's pretty cool, in my opinion. Now, just because God chose us before we chose him doesn't mean that we can just do whatever we want to do. This isn't some sort of get into heaven free card. It's like Pastor Drew was sharing a couple Sundays ago, that God has chosen us to offer this free gift of grace and salvation to us. But much like that door that we have on stage currently, we've got to open that door. We have to make that conscious decision to open it, to choose God, to choose to let him into our life. Just because he has chosen us doesn't mean that we don't have to choose him in return. It doesn't mean that we don't have to go and tell others because God already chose them. They're already going to go to heaven. That's not how this works. It still means that we have to evangelize. It still means that we have to let God in. It still means we have to choose to live a holy life. This should teach us instead to live a humble life. So then how does this understanding change your view on God choosing you before you even chose him? Does it give you a desire then to evangelize more? Does it mean that you need to grow in humility? Maybe it makes you understand the importance of living a holy life. Whatever it does for you, we can rest in the joy and hope that God has chosen to call us each sons, heirs to his kingdom through his Son, Jesus Christ. Look forward to seeing you next week as we continue our journey through Ephesians.